So on your screen right now, this is a picture of the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer at a conference with Mark Carney and Anthony Albanese. And this is the conference in which Keir Starmer revealed the plan to introduce mandatory digital ID cards called Brit cards in the UK. They're going to pass some kind of bill making it mandatory to be able to have access to some kind of digital ID on your smartphone. And he's done it on stage at a meeting of big world leaders. And the branding in the background, literally in the biggest letters in the background, is of the Labourite, Starmerite think tank Labour Together, which is quite literally, at time of recording, being investigated as part of an expose that had been done by a journalist called Paul Holden into donations that were given to Labour Together by millionaires and billionaires and business people and lobbyists that was not declared to the Electoral Commission in time, that Morgan McSweeney, the at-time chair of Labour Together and current Chief of Staff of Keir Starmer, was fined £14,000 or so. But there are some emails that make it look like that they were a little untoward in their explanation for the reason for the lack of declaration at the time. So it's being seen as a very shadowy group, because they are a shadowy group behind the current administration. And the digital ID plan is essentially a redevelopment of a Blair-era policy to introduce ID cards that was very, very unpopular, that was canned by the coalition government, and one of the very few good decisions that they made during their time post-2010 when they were in government as well. And wouldn't you know, the Tony Blair Institute, Tony Blair's think tank that definitely doesn't get huge amounts of money from Saudi Arabia and AI companies and people who definitely have 100% entirely pure intentions in wanting to have access to a bunch of information infrastructure about British citizens, which are going to be pretty comprehensive in nature, were the ones who have been very heavily pushing for digital ID to get pushed in the UK. Now, they also published a poll showing that it's overall kind of supported, but I have my doubts regardless. I'm clearly not a fan, in case you didn't realise in the way that I've been talking about this so far. But the reason why I wanted to push this, because the Tony Blair Institute is really, really close to the Starmer administration. Again, another shadowy and opaquely funded organisation being in charge of Keir Starmer and his policies, and very closely linked to Morgan McSweeney, his embattled chief of staff and architect of the plot to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the party. The reason why I wanted to start with this very specific photo is that it really shows just how politically inept the Labour Party are under Keir Starmer and McSweeney in terms of messaging, in terms of the reality of the kind of political environment that we currently live in, and just how totally missing the mark that all of this is. How totally missing the mark all of this is. It's like when Keir Starmer posted a picture of himself on Twitter next to Larry Fink from BlackRock, right? In the previous era of looking like you were close to power and close to business and close to the elite was a sign of prestige in politics. That time is over. And the kind of people they want to win over, because they're introducing digital ID more broadly, and I will get to the pros and cons of it later, but just in terms of the politics, they're doing it to, in their own words, crack down on people working illegally in this country, i.e. people who've arrived here as migrants and they've outstayed their visas, or they've arrived via regular means and haven't declared asylum and are working in the black market, would be some way depressed by the need to show digital ID when you are trying to apply for work. But the kind of people who are mad about asylum, the kind of people who are there losing votes to reform, for example, especially on things like migration policy and the desire to crack down on asylum, one of the things that these people broadly believe, because Reform UK is the mainstream conspiracy theory party, is that Keir Starmer, former member of the Trilateral Commission, former Director of Public Prosecutions, and someone who literally said that he preferred Davos to Westminster, they fundamentally believe that he's a deep state, New World Order, World Economic Forum, George Soros puppet who's an authoritarian who's trying to bring communism to Britain. Of course, lots of this stuff is very untrue, like him being a communist, for example. But he is fundamentally part of the business elite, which makes him a corporatist, not a communist. But I digress, right? If you were trying to pitch yourself as the person who could solve the small boats crisis, the issues of illegal migration and asylum seekers arriving here via irregular means, or people working illegally as asylum seekers, or people who don't have proper visas to work, if you wanted to appeal to people who care about this, you would not present yourself on stage with people who they also hate, like Mark Carney and Anthony Albanese, on stage with a bunch of opaquely funded people funded by people seen to be the elites. Right? Like, it's just, as Matt Zarb, cousin, friend of the show, has pointed out in the tweet we're looking at here, it is in hoc the most ghoulish people on the planet, which is obviously true, right? When you're trying to at least market yourself as on the side of working people, on the side of the normal people in this country, the people who set their alarms in the morning, and you're announcing this authoritarian policy measure on stage with branding of people who are already being seen to be shadowy in the background, like, you couldn't possibly conceive of a way of doing policy that made you look more like the deep state than you already do, right? If they didn't want to look like they were members of the deep state, they have done literally everything they possibly could do to make it look like that they are. Now, there is no actual deep state, whatever. There's just a broad set of incentives are in a capitalist economy. It's far more systemic rather than individual than that, right? It's not a group of, or shadowy cabal of people who are doing the things behind the scenes. That's the problem. It's the structure of what happens between business and government under a capitalist economy. But whatever, broadly, these people look like they're the New World Order. It just looks like the New World Order, and introducing something that you could perceive to be at least kind of sort of analogous to like a China-style social credit system is not going to win over the Reform UK voters that they want to win over with their authoritarian policy making, given that they already think that this guy is some kind of secret communist, even though he's not. It's just fundamentally the most slapdash stupid politics you've ever seen in your life, right? It's just so monumentally missing the mark, missing the political situation and the political zeitgeist. It's exactly the same as when they tried to do a George Osborne at a time people were sick of austerity and public spending cuts. It's just so bad. It's so bad from a communications perspective, which is where I wanted to start this, because this photo really encapsulates everything that's wrong with Starmerite government. You can't speak for the people whilst also wanting to look like Billy Big Bollocks, walking around amongst like the big and powerful people of the geopolitical realm, when fundamentally the little people who are being hit by things like cost of living crisis, they want the opposite of this. They hate Westminster, they hate Davos, they hate these international groupings, right? They want bare bones kitchen table policy to sort out their basic problems. It's so bad, right? And then on top of this, I think the policy is shit. I think it's I think it's awful for a whole host of reasons. I think that the ID cards, digital ID, is a terrible reason for a whole host of reasons. Big reason number one, right? Do you think the information infrastructure that is going to underpin a future digital ID in this country, given what we know about the links between not only Labour Party under Keir Starmer, but Labour Together and the Tony Blair Institute, who are all agreeing on this kind of policy, the links that they have to big tech? They already want to get Sam Altman in and OpenAI to streamline the public sector and find efficiencies by essentially replacing people's jobs with AI through these big kind of multi-billion-pound contracts with OpenAI to do that, right? They already seem to be close with these kind of new techno-feudal barons of the modern era, as well as the actual feudal barons of the modern era in people like BlackRock, which you've already seen them posting pictures with Larry Fink at the time. But the kind of information infrastructure, it's going to be somebody like Palantir, who we also know that both the TBI and the current administration are very close to, given that Palantir were the one who had the NHS contract that apparently is still going to go ahead to look after a bunch of NHS data. So first of all, I do not want anybody related to fucking Alex Karp or Peter Thiel having huge reams of very, very important, very personal data on every member of this country to be able to create the digital infrastructure necessary for this ID. Second of all, having a unitary position, having a single place where everybody's data is stored to facilitate the digital infrastructure for this ID is such a monumental singular point of failure if there was ever a cyber attack that we already know that we're incredibly vulnerable to, given what's happened in airports, given what's happened in Jaguar Land Rover just recently, or indeed internally in the government. Like, this is a monumentally terrible point of failure. It's just like how if you're in crypto and you have like your MetaMask, I believe the wallet that these people use, right, which is essentially your personal wallet for everything crypto or NFT related, right? That's like a monumental point of failure. If literally everything that you have financially in crypto is stored in a single place, which one kind of man in the middle attack or one phishing scam can uproot all of your financial investment in cryptocurrency. The same is very, very true if you have a single point of failure for every single piece of really important personal data that the government is keeping tabs on you for. Just monumentally awful in terms of the basic level to which they would create this infrastructure in the first place. That doesn't get on to the ethical concerns. That doesn't get on to all of the reasons why this looks like a real kind of Big Brother top-down surveillance state stuff that I'm sure that most people on the left and right of politics who aren't part of the sensible centrist adults in the rump block, well, if you don't have anything to fear, then what are you worried about? And I'm just like, I'm sorry, mate. As Jamie Driscoll pointed out on Twitter, you need to be banned from having curtains. If you think nothing to hide, nothing to fear is something that's a reasonable argument to use in opposition to digital ID. It's in opposition to this massive increase in the amount of data that the government is going to have stored in a single place on you that they can need you to have access to at any point for any kind of interaction outside of the realms of state oversight. Especially given that even if you had full confidence in this government to be able to do this properly and to do it sanely and to not overstep in terms of the ways in which they might use this to foment some kind of crackdown on the public, right? You'd be stupid to trust this government of all people, this very specific government, to treat all of this stuff sensitively. You'd be very stupid to do so. But even if you did, what's to stop a future government using these powers for bad? Like, I don't know, a Reform UK government. Whatever powers you think that they won't use just because the good guys are in government at the moment, doesn't mean a future bad government would be able to undo that based upon provisions in any potential digital ID bill, or just having access to the infrastructure, or doing things in a corrupt manner, or doing things under the table, or flouting the legislation without bothering to go through Parliament anyway because they're engaging in some kind of similar unitary executive theory that we're seeing in America right now. What makes you think the current paradigm, again, which I think you're stupid to trust currently, would be maintained by any future government with regards to the ways in which that they might exploit access to this information or the access to be able to limit the movements of people in this country, right? People who are mad, right, about like fucking traffic filters being a ways in which to control where you can or can't go, right? Those people crazy to think about that were being done when it was just traffic filters in 15-minute cities. And then we literally have the government going, we have this single point of failure, which we can use to essentially be a barrier to which you engage in certain transaction in society. Like, I think Big Brother Watch put out a really, really concise statement that outlines my concerns here. Some mandatory digital ID would make us all reliant on a digital pass to go about our daily lives, turning us into a checkpoint society that is wholly un-British. Digital IDs would have absolutely nothing to deter small boats, but would make Britain less free, creating a domestic mass surveillance infrastructure that will likely sprawl from citizenship to benefits, tax, health, possibly even internet data and more. Incredibly sensitive information about each and every one of us would be hoarded by the state and vulnerable to cyber attacks. Starmer has no mandate to force the population to carry digital IDs, and millions of us simply will not do it. The cost to the public purse will likely run into the billions, much like Blair's failed scheme, but the cost to our freedoms would be even more serious. He is making an enormous mistake and should drop the plan sooner rather than later. Really important points raised here. Some really important points raised. The first really important point is that there is no fucking mandate for this. This was not in the manifesto. There was no digital ID plan in the manifesto. No one voted for any of this. This is just being done because they knew that if they put it in the manifesto, people would bring it up and no one would fucking vote for them because people didn't want this. Especially people they wanted to vote for them, who were more from the centre-right of politics. Because they knew that people wouldn't support it if it was in the manifesto, especially given they tried it before under Tony Blair actually being Prime Minister, and people didn't want it then. People were very opposed to it then, and it was scrapped quite rightly by the coalition. And then now we have Tony Blair as the shadow Prime Minister trying to do it again with no electoral mandate with which to do so. So Big Brother Watch, absolutely 100% correct to point out from first principles that there's no mandate for them to do this. And I do hope that the House of Lords scrutinise this stuff very, very heavily, extremely heavily. I don't think that they will, because these people are the same people who were happy to pass through the Online Safety Act. But regardless, I do hope that there will be at least a non-zero number of people in the House of Lords who will at least to air the public's concerns on this, because in the House of Commons, Starmer has dictatorial control because of his quote-unquote mahoosive majority. Thank you very much, James O'Brien, for pointing out to us why Keir Starmer having a massive majority would not have any negative repercussions whatsoever. Second of all, another really good point put forward by Big Brother Watcher's statement there is that the central thing they're talking about here, with regards to the reason for implementing digital IDs, right, the excuse essentially for this, the way they're trying to sell it to the public, because really it's not actually about the irregular migration or people with outstayed visas or illegal migration, whatever it is, right? It's not actually about this. It's about state surveillance and control, just like the Online Safety Act is. It's not actually about protecting children. But even their supposed claim that it would help deal with illegal migration, which is what outstaying your visa is and working without proper authorization would be, because the kind of people who are employing those with no right to work in this country, which are the same people who would be blocked from doing so by needing to actually show this digital ID to be able to prove their claim with a right to work. People already go through scrutiny about their actual right to work in this country already when they're applying. And the employers that don't do that aren't going to suddenly be doing this when it's a digital ID rather than a paper ID. The people who are very happy to employ people illegally will still do this, and they'll just do it cash in hand instead. Not actually going to stop any people working illegally, because that's the whole point here. The whole point of this is supposed to be, well, if you arrive here via irregular means, if you're an asylum seeker, you're not allowed to work. So you're working illegally at the time, which is illegal for them to do so. Forcing them to have digital ID would stop them from being able to do that. Like, do you not think that a bunch of these companies who have loads to gain from employing people on shitty terms because they're working illegally, because it would undercut the basic level of the labour market, do you not think they would find a way around this? Do you not think they would just go like, maybe we're just going to do it anyway? Like, how's the government going to find out unless they do like a proper sting operation or anything like that? It doesn't actually stop anything that it could already stop now via the same kind of operation, you know? This digital ID is not a barrier for them to currently do what they're already doing. That doesn't stop that at all. But the line that's being done by Labour representatives in the media is that they're specifically saying, well, if you make it harder for them to work illegally whilst they're an asylum seeker, they're less likely to come here, and we'll be able to reduce the number of people arriving via small boat. Horseshit. Absolute, unmitigated horseshit. First of all, right, these asylum seekers aren't checking BBC News to find out what the current state of the asylum processing system is in the UK. The idea that any of them would is quite frankly for the birds. It's a ridiculous notion that they're taking some kind of notice of the finer points of the asylum processing system in the UK and what the nature of digital ID might be for, like, if you want to work illegally whilst you're staying in a hotel that you might be put into whilst your claim is being heard, but you're also not allowed to work, which forces you to cook meals on the floor of your shower, as the BBC expose found out the other day, which is also followed up by ITV as well, right? And that's not going to stop it, because the studies that we have, Migration Observatory have really good work on this, shows that the enforcement of poor conditions for asylum seekers does not actually, on a large scale, reduce the number of people coming here to seek asylum. Because this idea that if you're more punitive with what it's like for asylum seekers whilst their claim is being heard, you make it harder for them to live, you make it less attractive for them to come here, you have fewer pull factors, as the right-wingers always talk about when it comes to irregular migration and people arriving to seek asylum. These people don't know before they arrive. These people don't have the information before they arrive of what it's actually going to be like being an asylum seeker in the UK. They get told the stories about it, they speak the language, and that's mainly the draw factor for coming to the UK specifically, is either language or cultural or familial ties. That is the often cited biggest reason. The data already shows in terms of what happens when you've changed policies in terms of seeking asylum to make it more punitive whilst your claim is being heard, which Tony Blair did, and then also the Tories have done afterwards as well. They've continually made it more punitive to be seeking asylum, right? Did it bring the numbers down? No. No, it has not done. It has not brought the numbers down at all, because they're not paying attention. So they wouldn't be paying attention any further in future either. So it just doesn't even make sense or even work in terms of the actual premise that they're putting forward as the reason for introducing the digital ID in the first place. So Politics Home actually reported on the underlying internal stuff around who was pushing for the digital ID plan, right? And wouldn't it be an absolute giant shock if it was a bunch of people who were put into positions as MPs by the Politburo as Keir Starmer loyalist centrists, so loyal to not only Keir Starmer, but his regime at the top, and all of the hanger-on groups like Labour Together and the TBI, who are pushing this, right? It's a working group of centrist MPs, and it's led by Jake Richards, the son of Steve Richards, the posh boy private school Oxbridge Nepo baby. What a surprise! What a surprise! It is what at this point has become a career politician, Nepo baby Bellend, who is the one who's lobbying Keir Starmer to get the digital ID that we now have, who is part of the centrist Red Wall Brigade. Supporters of the digital ID scheme have also argued that it could move the welfare state towards a contributory model such as in Denmark, where people can see what they take out of the system is linked to what they put in, which is crazy. This is not social democracy. The idea that the state is some kind of big pot of money where everyone gets what they put in and then that's what they are allowed to take out is quite literally the opposite of how an actual social democratic state is supposed to perform. The social democratic state is supposed to, A, view money broadly as a collection of wealth within society that you move around for utilitarian reasons, but even before that, right, some kind of basic social democratic principle is the idea from each according to their ability to each according to their need, not about from each according to how much they've contributed towards the exchequer. No, that's not how this is supposed to work. But then again, this isn't a social democratic party. This is a neoconservative party at this point, quite frankly. Pressure on the government to adopt such the project is now coming from not only the centrist and Blairite side of the party, but also on the Blue Labour tradition, another group of the worst people in the Labour Party, all three of the worst people, the centrists, the Blairites, and Blue Labour, all bellends. All total bellends, right? Apparently Dan Carden, previous member of the Socialist Campaign Group, by the way. So this guy's a fucking careerist bellend, always just gonna hang himself to whichever wing of the party he thinks is in the ascendancy. Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate it. He's also backing it. He's also backing the policy. Turns out it's very popular with curtain twitchers. Great. Brilliant. The people who have unilateral control of a policy in this country, just getting what they want yet again. The Tony Blair Institute, a global think tank, has published policy papers on how the technology could be used to transform public services. Its research has suggested that the rollout of digital ID would cost $1 billion, but the government would recoup costs in the long term via higher tax revenues and lower spending. I don't think that's true, by the way. I don't think that's true. I think that is motivated reasoning to ensure that people who are linked to the TBI can get a government contract. Like, what would this do for public services? This makes no sense at all. Like, it makes the systems work together, but these systems already have infrastructure that's already there that works, right? I'm sorry, it's not going to save a huge amount of money, especially at the cost of £1 billion, and also whilst creating a singular point of failure. But I guess Director of Government Innovation, what that really means is Director of how to ensure that we can get more private contracts to be able to reform government, which essentially means having more corporate influence in government policy. And whilst certain individual opinion polls might show support for the policy, there is a large contingent who really, really do not want this. And in the course of a day, there is over 1 million signatures on this petition to not introduce digital ID. And you know what? I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised, right? It is frustrating that we seem to live in a country that is obsessed with crackdowns, which is obsessed with curtain twitching. But I'm glad that there is a very large contingent who actually does take civil liberties seriously. Because civil liberties are incredibly fragile. Civil liberties are not something that you play fast and loose with. If you want literally any evidence to show how fragile they are, look at the United States right now. Supposedly, with a First Amendment to protect free speech, and they are black-bagging people off the street for criticising Israel. I mean, putting Peter Carlin as the Science and Tech Minister in the first place shows you how incompetent they are already. He's moved on to business now where he's also incompetent. But it's true, this government just hasn't got a fucking clue what they're doing when it comes to technology. If only there was some sort of pass that gave me freedom to move from port to port, indicating my presence in the country. A port pass, if you will. Quite literally, I run sunset. And again, like, I'm kind of sold on the idea of at least kind of like a small amount of information being put on a physical ID card, right? Where you have some data, just, I am this person, I'm a resident in this country, on an ID card to make movement between countries easier. Like, we could negotiate Schengen access or something like that. Perfectly reasonable. Having, like, absolute reams of digital data on people that you need to have your fucking phone on you to prove who you are. No, I'm not having it. Literally, what happens when your phone gets nicked? What's that? Another massive point of failure for access to all your personal information? Oh, I've just put all of my individual personal information, which is incredibly detailed, into just a single app on my phone, and someone stole my phone, and now they have access to all of that information. Brilliant, great. Thanks, Keith. Much appreciated. Isn't a passport meant to be a national ID card effectively anyways? Yeah, exactly. Like, we already have this stuff. Let's have a look and see what Lisa Nandy had to say when she was talking about the policy on Sky News this morning.
Very good morning to you. So tell me a little bit more about this plan for the introduction of a BRIC card, a digital ID card. I mean, it was a policy that the former Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, ruled out just last July. So what's changed?
Well, first of all, it's not a BRIC card. That would obviously raise all sorts of issues across the whole of the UK. And so we're calling it what it is, which is digital ID.
I mean, that's a really important point, right? Is that there are plenty of Irish people in the occupied 6 counties who do not want to given a ID card, a citizen ID card, that marks them as being British when they are not.
And the idea is that we've got a country that has for a long time been living in a digital era but operating in an analog way. We've been looking.
Well, no, it's still stored digitally. Just because the information is on a spreadsheet in the NHS, for example, or in the DWP, that doesn't make it analog. It's not in like filing cabinets. It is on a server. It is stored on digital infrastructure in the NHS, right? It's just not a single point of failure subcontracted out to Palantir.
Over the last year, lots of different options and different countries and the ways that they have rolled out digital ID, including Estonia. And the major benefit of digital ID, of course, is that it makes it far easier for employers to check whether somebody has the right to work here. So for people who come here and want to work, it will be compulsory to show it. For all other UK citizens,
and I'm sure that all of the employers who are happy to employ people under the table who have no right to be here will just go, well, unfortunately, it's mandatory for me to see your BRIC card, so unfortunately, I can't employ you anymore. I would have done so illegally, but the government said I can't just not look at your BRIC card. All of this money in this brown envelope I wanted to give you, unfortunately, can't give it to you now because the government said one time I have to check your BRIC card, and I couldn't possibly just not do that. That would be insane.
It will be compulsory to have it, but not to show it. People will be able to choose whether they use it or not. But we think for a lot of people, you know, me included, who spend a lot of time digging out utility bills and national insurance numbers and copies of passports to prove verification.
Most people accept a passport. I have a passport. I use it for ID everywhere. Why does this need anything else on top of it? And also, she says, well, it's mandatory to have it, but won't be mandatory to show it. I'm like, yeah, I'll believe that when I see it. I will believe that when I see it, because I've not even talked about the most kind of pressing concern that I personally have over the idea of forcing people to carry digital IDs upon their person, is that, in case anyone was none the wiser, I am transgender. I know. Nobody knew. No one knows I'm transgender. It's obviously, of course, but whatever, right? Make it very clear for those who didn't know already. I am transgender, right? And we literally have this current government sitting on a bunch of bathroom bills being handed down to them by the EHRC, led by a gender critical that they quite literally put into the role. The current Minister for Women and Equalities, Bridget Phillipson, deliberately overrode the concerns of MPs to put into the role as a gender critical. They're sitting on bathroom bills at the moment that I'm sure Bridget Phillipson will put into statutory guidance. And do you think that the current administration, in their war on trans people, are not going to use this digital ID as a way of being able to enforce such a bathroom ban? Because previously, one of the concerns over the legislation or the statutory guidance being passed down by the EHRC was, oh, well, it means you might have to carry your birth certificate. Oh, well, as long as you've got your mobile phone, we can check your BRIC card. And I do not, for 1 second, believe that this fundamentally, openly, virulently transphobic administration would not force you to disclose your transgender status on your digital ID and use that to ensure that they can block you from being able to use the bathroom in public. I do not for one moment trust that this government would do anything other than the most draconian and transphobic shit possible with this digital ID. So yeah, not looking forward to that. Not looking forward to that at all, chat. Want to use the bathroom? Papers, please. Papers, please. I'm going to have to live like Georgie Kostava. I'm going to have to show my Cobristan passport to be able to use the loo.
In lots of different ways, that this will have a big benefit as well.
So this is, at the moment, the focus is on eligibility, proving eligibility for working in this country. But is there a plan to expand its use in future so that people need it for access for public services?
So the plan is to ensure that everybody has it, but you can choose whether you use it. So there'll be a variety of ways in which you could prove your eligibility for services in a way that you already do now, using paper documents and others. But we want to make sure that every UK citizen has access to it so that they can use it. We think it will be safer and more secure. The countries like Estonia, for example, have an encryption system, which means that only the information that needs to be shared with particular services is shared. We think it will empower most people to be able to not just access services, but also in the same way that the NHS app enables us now to access our own medical records, to be able to make online appointments. We think it will enable far more people to be able to navigate the online world much more seamlessly.
I mean, I don't think that that's going to be the case. Again, the big problem, of course, is that no matter how encrypted it is, it's still a single point of failure for people who know how to get around encryption, which, as we've seen from what this current government is like with its digital infrastructure, they haven't been good in protecting things even when they're encrypted. But regardless, right, like, I don't really see where the utility is coming from here. I really don't see it. I really don't see it at all. I think it will almost certainly be used as a crackdown on people on welfare, on transgender people, and on migrants. With the big three, by the way, the big three scapegoats, apart from Muslims as well. Although they can definitely use it to track people who've supported Palestine action. The way in which they'll be able to use this to be able to keep tabs on political action groups, for example, that they want to be wary of is also something that's worth looking out for too.
You talk about safety and security, but the government doesn't have a great track record when rolling out big tech projects. I mean, you just have to look at the problems with the Windrush system, the NHS's efforts as well to go digital and get an IT system online. And also, in recent days and months, we've seen a number of stories about cyber attacks as well that have brought companies to their knees, the likes of Jaguar Land Rover, M&S. Today, we're talking about a children's nursery as well. So what guarantees are there that people's information is safe?
Well, I think you're right to say that we've already got problems with cyber security that we've been on the front foot about over the last year. And we're about to bring forward new legislation that will strengthen our cybersecurity laws and help protect companies like Jaguar Land Rover, M&S and others from the sort of attacks that we've seen, which have not just had a devastating effect on their own businesses, but on supply chains and workers across the UK as well. The two things can be done simultaneously, and we've been looking at lots of countries around the world, the way that they've been able to tighten up their laws and protections around cybersecurity, and to be able to roll out digital ID. It's not just Estonia, it's India, Australia, and others.
Yeah, truly the paragons of responsible statecraft, Narendra Modi and the Bharatiya Janata Party. Yes, clearly the absolute peak of responsible statecraft Narendra Modi is.
Offline ID also carries huge risks. We've seen a rise in the amount of fraud and people's identities being stolen and cloned, people losing identity documents and then finding that somebody has taken their identity and accessed services and other things. So we think that as we roll this out, and we're confident that we can roll it out by the end of this Parliament, we will be able to keep people's data more secure as a consequence of these reforms, not less.
No, you created a single point of failure. You've literally got all the information in one place. One cyber attack, all the information gone. That's what the whole point of not having a single point of failure is for. If you have different systems for different sectors of government or sectors of the state, depending on what information is relevant to each sector at each time, you have multiple points of failure, and if one of those points does fail, it's only the certain relevant information to that particular part of government that then becomes compromised. Unlike this system, where all the information, whole reams of it, is all in one place, one cyber attack, all gone. All gone. And all of it has gone as well, right? The access is to all the information all in one place rather than disparate information stored based on what's relevant to each particular part of government or public service, or indeed private service that you may need access to.
A lot of Labour MPs are pretty uncomfortable about it. I've seen it described as authoritarian nonsense and a dystopian mess. Are you not concerned about civil liberties here?
Of course, it's an important debate that we've been having in this country for several decades. The last Labour government floated the idea of not digital ID, but identity cards. And there was a very live debate around that. And we've debated it ever since. It's important, of course, that we protect people's civil liberties. And we have got no intention of pursuing a dystopian mess. But I do think for most people, this is a fairly
Yeah, truly, the Tony Blair Institute, and indeed Tony Blair himself, and all his hangers-on, and indeed Keir Starmer and Morgan McSweeney, have never, ever, ever been associated with anything that could ever be described as a dystopian mess, ever. The last person I would expect to oversee something authoritarian and dystopian would be Tony Blair. I hope people notice the sarcasm there before people do angry comments later.
common sense and practical measure. And like I said, although all UK citizens will have a digital ID, it will not be mandatory for people to use it. It'll be entirely their choice. And we will be consulting over the coming months to
What about, is it going to be mandatory for the employers that you say? That they'll need, it's going to be mandatory to have it and then to show it when you want to have employment? Otherwise, how is that going to stop people working illegally when they don't have the right to because their visa is expired or some shit? No, it will be mandatory in some instances.
make sure that it's widely accessible and available. There are particular groups, older people, homeless people, people with disabilities, and we want to make sure that this is inclusive enough to be able to ensure that they can access and use it in the same way as everybody else.
So the focus at the moment is illegal working, and the Prime Minister has said the card's going to make it tough.
It's only mandatory if you want to work, but don't you also need it to apply for welfare as well? Isn't that Dan Carden's whole point in the Politics Home article?
For people to be able to do that, presumably also trying to tackle one of these so-called pull factors that make people want to make illegal crossings to the UK. Is there any evidence that ID cards would actually act as a disincentive?
No, there isn't. In fact, all of the disincentives that they've tried have very low success in reducing the amount of people arriving via irregular means to claim asylum. People talk about pull factors, again, as I mentioned before, as if asylum seekers are reading BBC News to understand the ins and outs of the asylum system, or they are bookmarked. They've bookmarked Migration Observatory to know exactly what the current policy prescription is like. Of course they haven't.
Do that kind of journey, given that there are ID cards in many other European countries and it doesn't seem to affect migration?
Also true.
Well, it will make it much easier for employers to be able to check and to know that the information that they're seeing is correct and hasn't been falsified. So I think it's an incredibly welcome step forward for a lot of employers who want to make sure that they're complying with the law. And of course, those who don't comply with the law already face penalties, which they'll continue to face. But we're not pretending for one moment that there is one silver bullet to solving the migration crisis that we inherited from the last government. The returns agreement with France disrupts the smuggler gangs' business model. It means that people who get on those boats know that they will and can be returned to France.
Again, only if they're checking the news to understand what the migration partnership is between the UK and France, which I find unlikely.
in order to have their claims processed. The digital ID makes it much harder for people to work in the illegal economy. The asylum claim processing measures that we've put in place has doubled the rate of applications that are being processed, so that people will know that when they come to the UK, their application will be processed swiftly, and if they can't stay here in the UK, then they will be returned much more quickly. Taken together, all of those measures, we're confident, will make a real dent in the crisis that we inherited. But we're not going to pretend, like the last government did, that there is one measure that is going to solve this problem overnight.
Kemi Badenoch says this is just a distraction from your pre-conference woes, and Andy Burnham.
I mean, it is really funny to me, right? Just broadly, it is the Labour conference this weekend, and it's starting this weekend at the very least, and they've decided to mar the discussions about what's happening at the conference by discussion of ID cards that loads of people hate, and also how badly Keir Starmer is being undermined by Andy Burnham trying to snipe from the sidelines. This Labour Party comms strategy is the singular worst thing I've ever seen in politics. They are so bad at this. They're so bad at it. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.